Okay, so let us start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here. These have been interesting times. Uh, yes, even somewhat in the manner of the Chinese adage. So, interesting times are not always comfortable times. So, I thought we should just talk about where we think where and how you should be invested, uh, given where we are today. So that's what this is about. And I hope it's interesting for you. So let us start. So, first of all, let me tell you that earlier this year, you saw everyone selling, actually, starting from about November, October last year, you saw everyone selling you gold funds. In fact, I've seen fund managers who a couple of years ago used to say that get rid of your unproductive gold and put it into equities, suddenly saying that now you should be buying gold. And the peak of inflows into gold funds was in January this year when it exceeded even equity inflows. And January was the peak for the gold price. So since then, the rupee has depreciated and import duty on gold has gone up. In spite of that, gold is down from where it was in end January. And of course, in dollar terms, it is down much more. In 2024, it was the India growth story. It was small caps. It was nobody wanted to listen to being conservative or managing risk or any of that. I mean, I firsthand saw that people said, "Why are you talking about risk? This is the time that when anything you touch is making money. So why are you being conservative?" Today, what is being sold is the Gift City global products and private credit or derivative strategies in the form of AIF or any other fancy named thing. And always remember, I mean, this is an aside, that an AIF is not an asset class. It is a structure. So it depends on what that AIF is doing. And oftentimes they are doing things which are riskier than what your uh, plain vanilla, let us say, investing looks like. Gift City has given an opportunity for people to set up the structures, but unfortunately, very few of them have any expertise in managing global money. And this is the result. As you can see, almost every Gift City product you would have heard of is down for 3 months, 6 months, and even for 1 year. None of them is even close to the benchmark. On the top, we have given the First Global products, and the Global Freedom Fund is not even an equity product; it's an all-asset product. So it has fixed income, which will be yielding, 4.5%, 5%. In spite of that, it has done better than all these Gift City products. And of course, our pure equity product is up 8% for 6 months, 25.4% for the year. And then this is in dollar terms, not in rupee terms. Obviously, in rupee terms, it is up a lot more. I'll come back to this table a little later. But the basic principle is this, that if you, we've actually done this exercise, that if you systematically invest in whatever has done well of late, whichever asset class, whichever country, whatever category of assets, you will equally consistently underperform. So I had actually used AI to make a caricature of a person driving a car looking backwards. And that is, essentially what you are doing. You are driving for the road that has already gone by, not for the road that is coming up in front of you. And that doesn't work. So what works? Consistent asset allocation. So our kind of advice has not changed in all these years. If some of you might have read my book, Money Myths and Mantras. So the first few chapters are exactly this: why asset allocation is important, why asset allocation within a single country like India is not enough, why you need global diversification. So this is not something we have discovered because Indian market did nothing for a year and a half, which is where most people are coming from, that Indian market has not done well off late. So now let us invest in global, which usually means US or at the most US and China. And the reason is, I mean, this people tell me that someday my industry is going to lynch me for saying this, but the fact is that the asset management industry is not really an asset management industry. Its focus is asset gathering. And what we have seen, and this again we have plotted since mutual funds started in India, 25 plus years ago, that when do thematic funds, when are they launched? When were the IT funds launched? When was the pharma fund launched? When was the defense fund, small cap? And each time the pattern is so predictable that the cluster of new fund offerings always comes near the peak of that theme. It is like almost a given. Like you had the technology funds coming just literally 1 or 2 weeks before the global tech crash. And in 2.5 years, that 10 rupee NAV became 2 rupee NAV. So and the reason is not that the asset management industry is stupid and they don't know that this is what is going to happen. But the point is that they are talking about this not because they think that theme is going to be the best performing theme ever. It is because they think they can gather assets by selling something in that theme. And that's the point that that you can gather assets. And when can you gather assets? When the person on the street has also heard about the theme. When they feel that so-and-so, my friend made money in defense, I did not make money in defense. So if an NFO comes with a defense theme, let me invest in defense. So that's the kind of logic. So which is the logic which is working now? That India में तो रिटर्न आया नहीं, तो अब क्या करें? तो अब अभी इंडिया में कोई पैसा नहीं दे रहा है, तो अभी ग्लोबल फंड लॉन्च कर देते हैं. Gift city structure भी है. So that's the kind of thinking that goes on, unfortunately. Not whether it's the right time to invest, A, and B, whether you have the expertise to do it. And, for me, that's like taking people's money is a big, big, big responsibility. So I'll tell you, for example, our portfolio management services started only in 2020. So, while I didn't mind being the first to go global, I was kind of the last to launch a PMS. And the first time we had got a PMS license was a good 20 years before that. And the reason was simply that till I thought I had the expertise, I could do something more consistent, more predictable, I did not launch a product. I can't see the screen anymore, Kavita. So now what is the other part is that before I go deeper into the global side, since this is a question that comes up often, I thought I'd just briefly address that, which is the India story over? That is also half of what is going around. So the same people who were selling you the India growth story 1.5 years ago are now saying that India is over. I actually saw a video of somebody on Z Business in July 2024 saying that structurally India will never see a bear market again. And now the same person is saying that India will never see a bull market again. So both those extremes were not true, are not true. And currently, if you look at, there's no point looking at index level valuations because the sectoral mix of the index keeps changing. If you look at 25 years ago, there were no banks in the index. Now banks and financials are the biggest weightage and so on. You can look at PSUs. Was it PSUs? At one point, PSUs dominated Nifty and Sensex. Then in between 15 years, we forgot about the PSUs altogether, that they were listed. But if you look at sectorally, we are not at extreme ends of the valuation spectrum. So even if you look at a crude method like PE, for most sectors, many sectors, we are actually below the average and we are definitely not at the extremes. The other thing is market breadth. So like in 2025, the market was extremely narrow. In a normal market, something like 40% of stocks outperform. In 2025, at a point, that number was less than 15%, which is why for 2025, while all the indices were up, whether you looked at Nifty or you look at BSE 500 and all that, but the average stock was down. The median stock was down. More than 40% of the stocks were down more than 10%. But now the market breadth has opened up. Now many more stocks are participating. So, things are actually looking better than what they were. And the third thing is, which is here first, which is that what does the sentiment indicate? And as I said, people who are selling the India growth story are now enumerating everything that is wrong with the Indian economy and Indian markets. But sentiment is a contraindicator. It is not my opinion. It is the data from every research study done anywhere in the world that when sentiment is very negative, the probability of next period returns being above average is much higher. It is when money making appears very easy is when you should be concerned. So the next thing is that how do we so I'll come back to global investing, but before that, let me just briefly tell you what is our process, how do we do things, and for that, let me just tell you that we all know that no automobile manufacturer in the world today can say that I will only do old combustion engine cars and not do electric vehicles or some other type of hybrid vehicle or anything else other than old-fashioned petrol or diesel car. That option is not available because then you will be left behind in the world. And things change. And another example, especially when I have a young audience, I like asking that why is hockey India's national game when we have done nothing in hockey for 50 years? And the answer to that is that once we used to dominate hockey from 1928 to the 1970s, we completely dominated hockey. 2 Olympics, not even a goal scored against India through the tournament. Then what changed? And that was that we switched from grass to AstroTurf, and which is artificial grass, and the skill set required changed from great stick work. It changed to being very fast, very fit, which Indians were not good at. And similarly, something fundamental has changed in asset management and investing, but fund managers are still working the way they were in the 90s. And that core change in investing is that it has moved from an information edge to because I mean I started in securities research when there was nothing called securities research in India in the 90s, and not just in India actually. At that time, you could any big fund sitting in a room with a company could get differential information. So the edge was an information edge. Now by law and by the easy availability of the internet everywhere, all data is with everybody. It's on everyone's desktop. Even a analyst meet, which used to be a closed door meeting, now the analyst meets the transcript has to be on the company's website. So now the skill set has changed to not getting the information, but analyzing the information, which actually means analyzing tons of information and data that is now available to everyone. And that is where systems come in. So the obvious, of course, benefit of artificial intelligence, machine learning is that the number of securities you can analyze is much more. Almost 800 securities in India. We have a cutoff about 1,000 crore market cap. And then there are more than 20,000 securities globally. And you can analyze many more factors per security. But it is beyond that. It is that, one of my favorite topics on which I have written often is that human beings are creatures of biases. That biases are something very hard-coded within us, hard-coded via evolution. So those of you who are interested, Daniel Kahneman is a good author to read about biases. For example, storification. Human beings are creatures of the story. So we don't like data. We like to hear stories, which is what a lot of, so-called financial experts also play on. We are looking for confirmation of our hypothesis rather than challenging our hypothesis. When we do well, we are the geniuses. But when we do badly, there are 1,001 risk factors to, which we couldn't have thought of. Company chor thi, operator ne chala diya, central bank did this. So that's an attribution bias, that on the good stuff, it is all due to me. The bad stuff is all due to external factors. So many things like that, bandwagon effect, because it's very difficult for us to sit out of consensus and do something different from what everyone is doing. So many like this. And the thing is that the machine is consistent. It is bias free. It is also human beings are not just creatures of bias. We also have a lot of randomness, and all of you will understand this, that we can have people with exactly the same amount of experience, give them the same data, whether it is in investing or let us say insurance professionals, and each of them will come with a different viewpoint on that. That is randomness. We ourselves will look at something differently if we fought with our spouse in the morning or fought in the traffic on the way to work. The other thing is we hate to admit mistakes. The machine is indifferent between success and failure. It will learn from both. It will improve over time, which again human beings usually cannot. But just machine is not enough. Because human beings are required at two stages. One is to code the machine properly. I mean, here I don't have the time to go into the details of that, but there's a reason why systems made by pure techies are not as good, because now computation power is available, so you can just analyze as many factors as you want. And if you do that, there is something called overfitting. That means you will see correlation where actually there is no causation. I mean, in the world, many things appear correlated. So the correlation between, let us say, nuclear energy and cheese consumed is 1, even though the two have nothing to do with each other. So, therefore, what you're trying to do in the system is really codify the expertise you have built over decades. So that is what gives you the edge. The other thing is that it is not just human beings, just machine alone. It is not a black box. We always have a human overlay at the end to do a check on the fundamentals, on the liquidity, and also factors like, is there a pandemic, is there a war, all those kind of things. So that's the whole point, that to give you returns with first manage the risk. And I'll just, so this is our tech stack. So this is like all the systems we use. I will not go into the details of that. Those who are interested later on, we can do that one-on-one. The other thing is that risk management, as I said, is key, because we are not looking to just maximize returns. We are looking to first box in the risk, and within that box try to maximize returns, because I spoke about how information edge is gone. So because of that, what has happened is that investing has moved from a winner's game to a loser's game. So, I mean, those of you who have not read it, just Google the loser's game. It's an old article, 1970s article, just 4-5 page article, but it will open your eyes. What is a winner's game? What is a loser's game? To give you an example, aviation at the time of JRD Tata was a winner's game. It was an adventure sport. But at the time, today, if you look at, there's only one way to fly an aircraft. Go by the checklist, don't make mistakes. So that is what loser's game means, that instead of trying to basically hit sixes on every ball, your first focus has to be not to get out, which means don't take a big hit on your capital, because that is very difficult to recover from. If you take a 35% hit on your capital, you have to go up 50% to come to zero, and so on. So as I said, this is how, and this is, of course, examples from India, that in the COVID crash of 2020, actually, this is also global. So both are global and India funds. When markets and most funds were down 30 to 40%, our India and global portfolios lost less than 10%. On the day of the Russia-Ukraine war, the Nifty was down, Nifty 500 was down 5%, we were down 1.6. So that's how, I mean, we also use hedging, which was there on that risk slide. So now, I mean, I've just like quickly run through this. So I hope it was clear. So this is the point, that global investing has to be part of your asset allocation, not today because India is going to do very badly in the next 1 year, which is not our call at all, but as an overall strategy. And this has been our consistent message. And why global? One example I always give is that when I started working, the dollar was 12 rupees. So in the course of less than a career, the rupee has depreciated only over 90%. Last year, when the dollar actually fell against a lot of currencies, the Indian rupee, for example, depreciated 25% against the euro. So if you were planning to send your kid to Europe to study, your bill went up that much in a single year. Then there is the fact that India is less than 3% of the world market cap. We were kind of at 4.5% plus at one stage. We are now down to 2.7, 2.8%. So there's no logical reason except the fact that you were born in India why 90% or 100% of your money should be in India. This has actually, if you totally objectively look at it, you're already overexposed to India because your home is here, your job or business is here. So actually, you should be investing even more outside. Just go back, Kavita. And the other thing, of course, is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I'll give you a story there. Actually, that's the story of why and how we went global. And that is for some of you who are younger, this will be from the history books, that in the 1990s, in the first half plus 7-8 years of the 1990s, there were all these Southeast Asian countries that were called the Asian Tigers that were the fastest growing economies in the world. And then suddenly they went through a crisis of currency and also the markets crashed. And between the currency and the markets, those markets fell in dollar terms between 50 and 90%. So Taiwan fell 50%, Indonesia fell 90%, all these South Korea, Thailand, Philippines were between 50 and 90. And that was a wake-up call for me that this is the danger of being in one market, that you can be wiped out if there is a crisis. And as I said, even without a crisis, there's been a 90% depreciation in the rupee over my career alone. And of course, the other thing is that the global investing does not mean just investing in the US. People think kind of that US always, quote unquote, always does well, but that is not true. In fact, like example is 2003 to 2007. This was a time when the US was not even coming off and high. No, it was already down post the tech crash. Remember, the NASDAQ high of 2000 was not crossed for 15 years. It was crossed decisively only in 2015. So coming back to this 2003 to 2007 period, even from relative lows in this period, the entire return from the US market was something like 65%. At a time when India went up 6 times. Of course, went up 6 times after 9 years of no return, but it went up 6 times. The whole emerging market index went up 3.5, 4 times. Brazil went up 10 times. And that is when, the stories always follow. So the story became that US is over as a power, US is over as a market. And now the baton has passed on to the BRICS. I mean, the BRICS acronym was coined during that time. And then US started to outperform again and people forgot about it. So this is the whole thing, that you can't just, upar say that US will always do well and it's okay if you just invest in the US. But that doesn't quite work. And also the other part is that investing in US and China is also not just in the names you have heard of. Because what happens, people think global investing means कि एक NASDAQ ETF ले लिया, चाइना के जो 4 बड़े नाम मालूम है, अलीबाबा, टेंसेंट, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, वो खरीद लिया, हो गया. But that is not how it works. You have to drill deep. I mean, China, let me give you an example. Till about, I think it was 2022, we were overweight China in some of these regular names. And then there was this mega IPO announced of Alibaba's subsidiary company called Anthill Financials. And then at the last minute, the government stopped that IPO. The Chinese government stopped that IPO. And that is when we sold off all these well-known consumer tech companies in China, because we said now this is no longer a bet on the business. The business we can analyze, but this is an extraneous threat that the Chinese government doesn't want anybody to become too big for their boots. So, I mean, this is something we cannot factor into a model. So let us not look at these companies. But did we stop investing in China? No. I mean, we were investing in various, we had semiconductor maker, a shoe maker, a coal company. So there are many kinds of companies. So, but you have to have that depth, because we have been doing it. As I said, the Asian crisis was the trigger. So we became not just the first Indian, we became the first Asian members of the London Stock Exchange in 1999 and of the NASD, which is the US broker dealer, about a year and a half later. So, I mean, other than the Japanese, nobody from Asia had gone west. So we've been doing it a long time. So you need that depth to be able to do that. Otherwise, you will just confine yourself to, either the indexes or in US, those 10 major stocks that you know of and so on. Like, for example, that worked for a while also. I mean, like last 3 years, if you had just bought the big seven, the magnificent seven tech stocks in the US, you would have done okay because that was what was leading the S&P. So, but that is no longer the case. And now if you look at, people are still saying that India has no future as a market because India doesn't have an AI story or what they call an innovation story. But that was yesterday's story because already even in the US and globally, the market has broadened out beyond the Max 7, in fact, beyond technology also. This is the interesting bit which often is off the radar for people. And this was something I just, Mint does this Guru portfolio, which is the where is your personal wealth invested? And because I just did this, so this is, I have more than 80% of my money globally, which because last year was so good globally and not so good in India, has become more than 85%. But let me just give you an overall sense. Like, for example, where does asset allocation help? Like in India, for example, in equities, we got no return. But those of you who are in a multi-asset product know that we got about 7% return in the multi-asset product, partly because precious metals went up. And because I had this global investing, the global funds in rupee terms returned 42%, and which overall gives you a 35% return. So this is an action what diversification means. And coming back to what we were talking about, whether how the market has broadened. So the US, if you look at the small cap this year, the Russell 2000 has done far better than the S&P. It is up 18% versus 11% for the S&P. In fact, a month ago, it was the kind of differential was even more. And also the trend is shifting also to the old economy and the small cap. So in the Russell 2000, every single subsector is in the green. That's the whole point. In S&P also, quite a few sectors are in the green. But I mean, it is not just information technology, or of course, I mean, one obvious one is energy, which is because post the war, actually before the war also, the first 6 weeks alone, Enron, not Enron, Chevron was among the top performers. But so was Johnson & Johnson, so was Walmart, and so on. So it is now fairly broad. The other thing, the Magnificent Seven, the 7 big tech stocks, they were the story in up to 2024, where they were contributing more than 50% of the S&P move. Last year, it was 40%, but more interestingly, this was led by only 2 companies, Google and NVIDIA. All the other 5 underperformed the S&P. So basically, this bull started to tire last year itself. It was tiring. This year, 3 of the 7 stocks are actually down for the year. And therefore, of course, their contribution is reducing. So that's one. And so this, as I said, that you can see that 3 of the stocks are in the red. And basically, again, 2 are running, are sort of doing the heavy lifting. And globally also, it is a pretty similar pattern. ACW has an all-country world index. So this is the global equity index. Again, you will see that, fine, and IT is up and energy is up, but so are materials and industrials and so on. Yeah, next slide. Now, now from the Magnificent Seven, it has moved to people supplying to the Magnificent Seven. So those Mag 7 are the mega scalers for artificial intelligence. They are the ones who are putting up the artificial intelligence sort of capacities. But this year has belonged to all those who are, go back, to all those who have supplied to them. So if you look at, there are all these companies, semiconductor and all that, and semiconductor equipment. So the Micron, Intel, AMD, Lam Research and all that. But not just that, they've even gone to the old time kind of Dell and IBM also have started running, even if the ones providing kind of networking equipment. So it's all running on that capex. Next slide. So these are all the subsectors have rallied between 30 and 43%. And but now this is the thing which people, I mean, I even see people calculating PEG, P divided by growth and saying these are looking cheap. But this is 1 year growth is not where you can analyze whether something is cheap or expensive, because semiconductor and semiconductor equipment industries are highly cyclical. For one, most they are very capital intensive. So most capital intensive industries are cyclical. And the reason is very simple, that when the demand comes in, you have a lot of demand and you have a lot of pricing power. So a lot of supply gets added, and then there is not enough supply for, no enough demand for that supply. That's one part of it. But the other part also is that they are essentially dependent on capital expenditure by others. Now, just understand this distinction. So let us say you are selling toothpaste. Let us say you are selling 500 crores of toothpaste. Now, next year when you start, that 500 is not going to come down to 100 or go to 1000. It will be plus minus from that 500. But when you are supplying something which is capital expenditure for somebody, you essentially start from zero every year, more or less. So this year, the mega scalers, as they are called for AI, may be spending $700, $800 billion. Some estimates say that it will be close to $1 trillion in 2026. But the real $1 trillion question is, 2 years later, how much will they be spending? Because right now it is that you can't afford to be out of the game. But is this kind of investment ever going to make enough return on capital? Already, debt burdens are rising. There is most of the user industries are saying, like there was the Uber CEO said that we spent on AI, but I don't see it giving us economic return. So we are going to cut back or whatever we are spending on AI. And that is the sort of thing that's going to happen. And it has happened in earlier cycles also, which is not to say that the technology doesn't succeed. No, in the history of the world, there have been many technologies that have succeeded, from railroads onwards, or 20th century. You look at automobiles and aviation, very successful technologies. They have changed the way the world lives, but they have been a graveyard for investors. You look at internet, first, of course, was the dot-com bust. After that, people said, okay, let's not invest in the end guy. Definitely everybody in the world is going to come onto the internet. So let us invest in the internet infrastructure company. So that was another round of bust. So for example, the undersea cables on which the internet still runs, a lot of it was put in by Global Crossing, a company which went bankrupt more than 20 years ago. So then that is the whole point. If you're not making enough return on capital, I go to keep investing at this scale. Also, data centers and AI investment use huge amount of energy and water, which are finite resources. I mean, I go to have that kind of resource to keep scaling at that level. So that was one thing. The other thing, of course, I'm just anticipating some of the questions. That other thing is about geopolitics and what does history show on what you should be doing at a time of so much geopolitical turmoil. And there the interesting, and go back, that there the interesting thing is this, that we did this study. Actually, first time we did this study was just when the kind of there were tensions building up on the Ukraine-Russia border. So we went back 50, 55 years. We looked at every big geopolitical event, the two Gulf Wars, Afghanistan, US bombing Libya, 9/11, all of those. And what we found was that the markets forget about it. 6 months later, and 1 year later. It was not a statistical exercise because we found no exception. So we had gone back about 55 years. Financial Times more recently did an exercise which went up to 1900. So 125 years of data, including the two world wars. And they came to the same conclusion that do not react to geopolitics, because the history of markets show that whatever is the impact of geopolitics is very temporary. The only exceptions are when your country is directly in the conflict and it gets defeated. So if you were Germany and Japan in the Second World War, yes, your equity investors had a problem. But otherwise, generally speaking, I mean, the big crashes in financial markets have had really nothing much to do with geopolitics. So, do not spend too much time and effort. Of course, if of petrochemical prices go up and that impacts a company's earnings, that sort of thing you have to take into account, but not a general kind of thing. And also, typically, this also I've noticed that the wars themselves don't get over quickly. Look at Russia, Ukraine, 4 years and counting. Even when the adversaries are very mismatched. I mean, who could be more mismatched than US and Vietnam? In fact, this whole terminology of bombing them back to the Stone Age was first said by a US four-star general for Vietnam in 1965, that we'll bomb Vietnam back to Stone Age, and obviously we will dominate. 7 years later, US had to leave Vietnam without conquering it in a sense. So that doesn't have, the wars don't keep going on, but the if your narrow thing is only the markets, that impact is not there. I mean, that's what the history of the world shows. The other thing is the bond market. So, for example, today on one of my WhatsApp groups, people were saying that, what can stop Trump? One, of course, is the oil prices, because they impact the gasoline or petrol prices, which is a political thing in the US. The other part is the bond market. So I have posted this quote multiple times. I think it was Bill Clinton's economic advisor, or was it, I forget, some US president's economic advisor, which said that if there is reincarnation, earlier I used to think I should come back as the president or the Pope. But now I have decided I should come back as the bond market, because the bond market can intimidate anyone. So the US cannot afford very high yields, and the yields were kind of touching 5% not very long back. And that was like, if you go back, is about not just a 10-year high, it's almost where it was 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, US's debt burden as a percentage of GDP was much, much lower. So this is now, US basically can't afford the bond yields going up too much. So that's one part which which I think will put a check on what US does. Though, I mean, every day, 2 days ago, Trump was saying to Israel that stop bombing Iran. And today again, he's back to saying that just bomb it out of existence. So that is, that's unfortunately, now you have somebody in the kind of the driver's seat who is completely unpredictable. Sometimes people ask me that what will Trump do next? I said, does he even know what he will do next? And just let me, I'll come back to some of the other things, but let me just quickly go through what are our offerings. So this is, so we keep it simple, because as I told you, in principle, see, that I have two issues with thematic funds or schemes. One is, of course, as I said, that they often come, in fact, almost always come around the peak of that theme. But more than that, we spoke about asset allocation. Why are we talking about asset allocation? Because asset allocation determines something like 80 to 90% of your returns, not the specific stocks, not the great brainwaves on multi-baggers, but which country, which asset class, which sector. So if I'm leaving that decision to you, that right now is a good time to go into small caps, or right now it's a good time to buy power stocks, then what am I doing? What are you paying me for? Me meaning any fund manager for. So we have fairly simple products. So we have a India Super 50 because we believe in a diversified portfolio. It would be, if any of you are interested, I will explain why diversified, but that's roughly because we have around 50 stocks. The other is the multi-asset allocation portfolio, where the equity portion is the same as the India Super 50, but we add on fixed income, we add on also in India, there's not that much diversity of what we can buy, but things like gold or silver and all that. And then we have global products, where currently there might be more interest. So the Global Freedom Fund and the multi-asset allocation portfolio both are all countries, all assets. The fund is more tax efficient because the fund does not pay tax, and then you are also taxed almost like an Indian mutual fund. So you do get the long-term capital gains and all that. And the minimum, because that's a regulatory minimum, is $100,000. So this is not an India mutual fund. It's an overseas mutual fund. You can use LRS to invest in any of these if you are an Indian resident. If you are an overseas resident, anyway, no problem. And but since this is a cause for me that Indians don't invest abroad and they should, so our grandmothers were not wrong in buying gold, because at that time you could not invest overseas. So the only way to hedge your currency was gold. But now that you can, and it's a generous allocation and it's very easy to make the transfer. So the similar strategy we follow in a portfolio thing, which is $10,000, which not very long ago was 7.5 lakh rupees. Now it's 9.5 lakh rupees. And since some people wanted and insisted that they wanted an equity only product, we also have a pure equity portfolio product. Now, this is mostly for people who have, which have purely global money. So not LRS, you can't use anything, even if it is low risk, if it is using derivatives, it is not allowed under LRS. So this is really for the really family office and ultra HNIs and people who have money overseas. So I will not go into the details of that. Those of you who are interested can contact the team on that. And how have our global products done? So we actually launched our global products more than 5 years before we launched the PMS. So this was in 2015. So since then, the dollar CAGR has been 10.1%, as against, I mean, these are also not very comparable kind of benchmarks, but to the extent we could get the benchmarks, the benchmarks were about 7.7% to 9.5% CAGR. Or the other way to look at it is that 1 million has become 3 million for us, and 1 million has become 2.3 to 2.8 million in the in the benchmarks. And in rupee terms, of course, the returns are much higher. These are dollar returns. And also now let's just pedal back to today is one time when there are a lot of global funds being launched. The last time you would have seen a slew of these was 2021, where a number of NASDAQ ETF and fund of funds were launched, and not in hindsight, but at that time itself, I had said that the NASDAQ has had a great run and you should be careful. And 2022, NASDAQ was about the worst performing index in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of people sold out then. But people came to me also and said that should we sell now? I said, don't compound a bad buy with a bad sell, because a major index down 40% is almost never a sell. A stock down even 80% can be a sell, but not a major index. And of course it recovered. But then, as I said, from that time, it saw a 40% fall in about a year. And that's the whole point, that, I mean, I am a little scared of the number of people who are launching global products with no real expertise. So I have fund managers who were doing this similar portfolio with Mint and who had almost no global investments or had one global index fund earlier. And suddenly, they are there out there saying we have expertise with maybe 2 analysts. I mean, this is actually, somebody told me that I asked someone who launched a global fund that how many analysts do you have? I said, we have 2 analysts and you're just doing it. So without the right people, your overall returns can come down substantially. This is the risk. And as I said, we went global in 1999, and we are not the only ones claiming that we have expertise. In fact, let me tell you the story, because at that time we were not managing money. At that time, we used to be brokers and investment bankers. So in India, we were dealing with almost 100% with the foreign institutions. So some of the largest funds in the world were our clients. So when I thought of going global after the Asian crisis, so that was one trigger, and the other was I am a learning junkie. So for me, it was that how long am I going to keep doing the same company? The Bajaj Auto, Infosys, HDFC, SBI, वो तो अभी तक भी वही list है. So I said I want to go outside India. So when I was discussing with these people, they told me that if you want to go outside India, add a few other emerging markets, add a Thailand, Philippines. So the fund manager will be the same. They'll give you some business there also. I said, what's the fun in adding markets which are even smaller than India? So I want to go to the big markets. And they said, are you crazy? I mean, nobody had thought research could be done offshore. And they said, like, even if you can, first of all, can you do it? And even if you can, who will listen to you? They have the Merrill Lynches and the Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and Citicorps and HSBC. You are a nobody. I mean, or are you crazy? I said, I think I know how to do securities research. Let me go there and see. And the most heartening part of our international kind of foray was that in no time we were in Forbes, Fortune, Business Week, Wall Street Journal front page, everywhere. And we were not just doing US, we were doing Europe. As you can see, even Baidu and Japanese stocks. So even the major stocks in Asia we were covering since then. And those markets are complex. Those companies are much more complex, and the list of companies changes. For India, में तो मोटा-मोटा वही companies हैं. But early 2000 tech in the US meant, which have just made a comeback. It meant Motorola and Dell and IBM, and the only Cisco was once the largest market cap company in the world till it fell almost 90% from the peak. I think 85, 86% from the peak. So that list itself has changed. Now, when you say tech majors, those are not the company. The only common company from then to now is Microsoft. Otherwise, the whole list itself has changed. So that was the thing. And as I said, it's not just us saying it. It was like our research has been recognized since then. This I'm talking the early 2000 onwards. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So this, of course, is just a couple of examples or well-known examples, probably our best-known examples. One was in India, the HDFC Bank 1996 report. And it's so far back that the membership at the bottom is Messrs. Devina Mehra, because at that time, corporate membership was not allowed. So it was my proprietorship till corporate membership was allowed, and it became First Global. I mean, we were already using the First Global for research, but the brokerage firm also became First Global. And of course, Amazon at $12, at $15, which is 75 cents split adjusted at a time when nobody on Wall Street had a buy on it. So Jeff Bezos actually sent us an email saying, thanks for the support, because ours was the only buy on the street. So, and also then, of course, next one. So this is what I was talking about, that Barron's, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, everywhere. So that's a story for us. And the whole point is, as I set out, the results are not the product of brainwaves or some key person or the expertise. The human-only fund management no longer outperforms. So, I mean, this is a systematic thing that we are doing in terms of managing the money. And to go back to where we started from, as I said, the results are there. Even in a multi-asset product, we have given a 22.5% return for the last year, and in dollar terms, of course, much higher. But the whole point is that you can look at the performance of all the Gift City products, and you can make your own decision on whether they have the expertise. Because for a few years, even people who were doing global, it was easy to coast with just doing those Magnificent Seven investments, which everybody knew the names of those stocks. But now that that's no longer working, it is showing in the performance. So this is, of course, So our global products, as I said, start at $10,000. So that's 9.5 lakh rupees. And our whole objective is to give you the right advice. And now let me look at the questions. So Amit Singhal is asking if I'd like to invest in the S&P 500, what level should I be looking at? So we do not believe in investing in a single market. So if you are, we call it SCARS, single country, single currency, single asset risk. So if you are only, let us say, in Indian equities, you are scarred. But even if you add US, I mean, it is better than being only in India, but not much better because the US is not the world. I told you the 2000 high of the NASDAQ was not taken out for 15 long years. So, for example, for in our portfolios and funds, we have been underweight US since the beginning of 2025. We went overweight Europe, China, we were overweight from 2024. And since then, before this conflict started, I mean, when in February, when we were doing our rebalance, we just thought that the crude in particular looked due for a rally. So we reduced US further and we put it into commodities, so crude and metals. So currently, I think our US exposure as a part of our global fund and portfolio is something like 38%. So, for example, the last countries we've added are Mexico and Malaysia, which are not even, I think, on anybody's radar. So, I mean, I would not like to say that you should get in at X level of the S&P. Only good thing about the S&P is that unlike the NASDAQ and some of the other indexes, they are not adding SpaceX to, they are not diluting their norms to add SpaceX. Assuming everyone is going for global allocation, will this not push up the prices for those favored global equities? I mean, whatever Indians are putting in is so microscopic, it can't move the needle. So whatever is happening will be not depending on whether Indians are putting in money or not. C4, somebody is asked that if you are over 50 and have faced negative returns from domestic investment for last 2 years, what should you be doing? So, I mean, this is not something I spoke about. I just generally spoke about asset allocation. But if you ask me that which are the biggest kind of dangers of asset allocation, of the worst advice you get for asset allocation, it is that be 100% in equities when you are young. Let us say if you're 25 in a good job, be 100% in equities. And equally bad advice is that at retirement, sort of taper off all your equity investment, and by the time you retire, you should be 100% in fixed income. And the reason is this. I mean, why you should not be 100% in equity? Because equity returns are not predictable. So equity money should be money you do not need for the next 8 or 10 years. And even if you are young and in a good job, there could be a medical emergency. You might want to buy a house. You might want to, let us say, go abroad to study. You might lose your job. So have some money which is not in equity. Equally, if you are 55 or 60, now people don't realize that your post-retirement life, it can be as long as your working life. You retire at 58 or 60, you have to budget for the next 30, 35 years. And 100% safe assets will not, even take you beyond inflation. So you have to have a mix where you do have equities also, but not money which you have to withdraw within the next 4 or 5 years. That's the key part, because in equities, in theory, all of us know returns are volatile. So some years returns will be positive and some years returns will be negative. And if the negative returns come first, let us say you start after retirement, you want to withdraw some amount, you start with 100 rupees. If the next year the market is down 10%, now you're at 90 and you're still withdrawing money, then your capital itself is shrinking. So the order of the returns matter. So that's why, anything you have to withdraw within the next few years, don't put in equities, but do have something in equities. Somebody's asked for rolling returns. Yeah, I mean, you can send us a message and then we will share that. On the Magnificent Seven, I mean, we are not saying that we never look at that, but the only one we were ever overweight on compared to the benchmark was Nvidia. And because we were not at the market weight, there were, of course, in the last 3 years, there have been periods when we underperformed simply because we were not comfortable putting in that much money in the market. When the market is very, very narrow, we are happy underperforming a bit because we don't want to take that excess risk of in a narrow market going even more overweight on something which is running. So, I mean, somebody is asked whether global market has done well. So that's the whole point. Global what is global? I mean, emerging markets had not done well at all for years till about a year ago. So, as I said, for us, global is not the US. We've been underweight the US. And then there's a question saying, what's the ideal mix of India versus outside India? So as I said, logically, it should be a lot higher, but at least aim to get to 30-40% of your portfolio to global funds. As I said, India is only 3% of the world market cap. What would be a turnover in the global pure equity portfolio? Kavita, if you have it available, just take it out and give it to me ready. You're saying we are using AI for global funds. Everybody has AI. In fact, I just did a panel 2 days ago for Reuters on this, that if everybody has AI, then who has the advantage? And which is why I said that pure techies, often the systems they make don't work as well, because now you have the computation power. So you can, I'll give you a few examples of why you need the human part, or why one AI is not the same as another AI. I mean, suppose I asked you that are financial models made in Excel accurate or not? And you'd say that's a stupid question because, Excel is only a tool, depends on what you put in it. And so AI, machine learning, all these are tools, depends on what you put in it. And it starts from all levels. It starts from cleaning up the data to making sure that there's no survivorship bias. So for example, if you're evaluating mutual funds today or stocks today, you can't start with the number of stocks or the number of mutual funds that exist today and just look at their past data. Because there are stocks which have stopped trading, which have gone out of business. I mean, in India, about 4,500 stocks trade. The number of listings in India at least has been about 3 times more than that. So that means 2/3 of the stocks that listed don't even trade anymore. But if you are trying to make a system, you have to make sure your data has all those stocks also which have gone out of business, but which did exist at the time when you are testing out that what would I have bought. So that's one level. Then there is, as I said, you can test 10,000 factors, but that's a danger. I mean, we start with first defining a factor that makes some sense and testing it out. So we don't have factors like x to the power of y plus cube root of z. It has to be explainable. It has to be, in a plain language explainable very quickly. Then somebody has asked that, do you have any so these are like some of the things, but basically, I mean, there are lots of checks and balances to make sure that the one system is not quite the same as another. So just having the tools is like everybody having Excel on their desktop. That doesn't mean that everybody makes the same quality of financial models. We have a Cayman Island-based investment product. Yes, that's the Global Freedom Fund. So that's a Cayman product. So it's regulated by the It's a very well regulated jurisdiction. So about 60-70% of the US hedge funds are domiciled in in Cayman Islands. And that 100,000 minimum is also their regulatory minimum. Yes, LRS option is still allowed. LRS is 250,000 per person per year. So a family of 4 can send out $1 million. So taxation for the GMAP and GPEP, which are portfolio products, every buy and sell has a taxation thing. In the Global Freedom Fund, I think beyond 2 years, it is long-term capital gains, and the fund itself does not pay any taxes because it's a Cayman fund. And beyond that, if you need more details, you can always send us a mail or a message. So other people who are asking about, so all returns I have given are after fees. So I mean the benchmark obviously has no fees in it. All the numbers I have given are after fees. So we have totally in India and global together about, I think about 70 people. And we have a common team that manages both India and global funds. So we have, and we have very experienced people, as well as especially on the tech side, we have younger people who are well qualified. So can a person contact me on my email for investing? So I hope your email is with us. So, and we'll, on the screen, our contact details are there. I mean, because I am just scrolling through the questions, so I can't see that. Karthik, Kavita, is it there?
I'll share it, ma'am. Just a moment.
Yeah, just so that everybody can, have the WhatsApp number and the email ID, however they want to contact us. So for non-US companies, how do we invest? So certain jurisdictions allow you to invest directly in stocks. Others, we have to take either a country ETF or we have to take uh, even within Europe, for example, a lot of countries you can invest directly, but some of the Scandinavian countries, I think you cannot. So like India also, unless you register as a FII, you cannot invest directly. So some countries are like that, but there are enough countries where you can invest directly also. So we, in our global funds, we've held everything from South African REITs to, Singapore trading companies to Australian mining companies, and as I said, Chinese shoemakers. So for the pure equity global funds, $25,000 is the minimum. There is no minimum annual returns that can be guaranteed on any product, because these are all equity oriented products, even if they're not 100% equity. In a normal, the reason why we want to keep that flexibility is that normally we will have something like 70 to 80% in equity. Right now we have about closer to 70% because we have reasonable investment in commodities also. But this gives us the flexibility. So at COVID time, we had gone to less than 10% equity. So that flexibility we like having. Some people have given their specific that this is how much they want to invest, and this is what their target financial goal is. For those kind of things, it is better that you contact the team so that we can give you a particular thing, what makes sense to you, and also look at your current portfolio and tell you what is worth holding, what is not. Why are we not visible anywhere in the media? I just showed you tons of media. But for the first 20 years of our existing as a business, we were not managing money. We were on the sell side. As I said, we were a broker and investment banker. It's only in the last about 10, 11 years that we have gone on to managing money. what is your opinion on complete global investment versus 85% global and 15% Indian? So if you want to be absolutely in line with how the benchmarks are, it would be 95% global and 5% Indian. So, I mean, we are not hedging all the time. This is holds true for both India and the US because, obviously insurance costs money. So you are never hedged for 100% of your portfolio 100% of the time. But at times when things look uncertain, you put in hedges, which are essentially put options. So you're saying that if the market falls 20%, I should not fall 20%. So that's what you're trying to protect. 20% or 30%, you should not fall that much. So, I mean, all the other specific questions on taxation, I've already told you broadly that in the fund, it is more like after 2 years, it's long-term capital gains. In the portfolio product, every buy and sell, ultimately you have to pay tax. Risk management does not mean that the principal is always secured because in an equity type product, that cannot be the case. I mean, that's the whole point that all of us know theoretically that equity is a volatile asset class, but when the volatility actually, you have to live through it, it seems like you panic that I have to get out somehow. And that's actually the worst time to get out. So let me also give you one little anecdote. Many of you who are interested in markets may have read this book or at least seen this book around called One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. Now, Peter Lynch was about the most successful fund manager in US history for a period of time. And his mutual fund that he was managing for Fidelity compounded 28, 29%. Yet, the average investor in that fund compounded only 7%. And a large number of investors in the fund actually lost money. So they lost money in the best performing mutual fund of all time in the US. And why did they lose money? Because they entered at the wrong time and exited at the wrong time. Because no strategy, including ours, will not only give you positive returns every year, will outperform every year. That's not going to happen. There are always periods of underperformance and periods of outperformance. So even on this spectacular mutual fund, there were years when it outperformed hugely, and that's when everybody rushed in. And typically after that large outperformance would come a year of underperformance and everybody would rush out. So that's how people lose money in even good products because they don't stay the course. I mean, the SEBI data shows that the majority of investors in India exit within 2 years of investing in a mutual fund scheme. That's the overall data. Yes, we do have investments in Taiwan and South Korea, but that's not like we've not taken outsized bet. So again, see, as I told you, I mean, we've been covering all these semiconductor stocks for over 20 years. You will see old reports on Intel and AMD and Micron and Qualcomm. We know how volatile this industry is. So as I said, our focus always is risk management first. We say 60% of your fees is for risk management, 40% is for return management, just to emphasize that risk come before return. So, I mean, we will not take a very large bet on what we know are very volatile sectors. So our PMS, I'm not very clear of this question that how is your PMS different from global mutual fund? So in a PMS structure as such, that is India only. Our PMS is India only. The global products are completely separate. Is there too much dependence on you for First Global's continued success? Not at all. That's why I'm saying that the difference between us and most PMSs are basically one-man shows, most of men. So that's why I'm saying one-man shows. Not just PMSs. What surprises me is that very large mutual funds in India also depend on the kind of whims and fancies, for a want of a better word, of the person at the top. कि उसको banks पसंद है तो सारी schemes में bank होंगे. If the guy likes PSUs, then every scheme will be stuffed with PSUs. we actually guard against that. That's our whole point. That's why I said I had a license for a PMS even 20 years before I launched. But I said, I cannot launch a product which just depends on what I like and I dislike. That is no way to manage anything. So only when we had a data-based approach where there was some predictability and some consistency did I launch a product. So I would say the key person risk is the least here. And the rest of the people on the investment committee also have been with the firm for 20 years plus. So, it's not just that, I mean, I may be the public facing thing, but that doesn't mean that, and as I said, we have, like Kavita was on the call, she was there even before we went global. She's been there almost, I think, 22, 23 years, or maybe 25 years. So is it advisable for a retired person to invest in a global product? Yes, because as I said, you have to account for the next 25, 30, 35 years, which will see rupee depreciation, which will see inflation. So what you think is conservative is actually risky because you don't want to run out of money at 85 and find you're living till 92. And today, for the average Indian 60-year-old, the life expectancy is 19 years. This is, I'm talking all India. So the people who are on this call, the life expectancy will be much higher. So you have to account for that. If somebody is asking that if I'm in GMAP, can I invest in GPEP? Yes, they're two completely separate things. You don't have to consolidate the two. They're two different products. You can be in both. See, nobody can time to perfection. As I said, we keep revamping our portfolio according to what our view of the world is. So as I said, now we are quite underweight US. So it is not, I mean, we are not taking a bet that the US is going to be the market that's going to be driving it. So there are some questions on that kind of thing. So again, the parents of a special needs child, I have a special needs child, allocation between India and global, again, you are going to be kind of investing for the long term for several decades. So it should again be a mix because as I said, India only, I told you since I started working, the rupee has depreciated over 90%. So if you are an NRI, yes, now the FCNR rates are good. I mean, I would say you can certainly put part of your corpus there. Absolutely. US dollar INR is already elevated. I don't particularly think so. I mean, for the time being, you might see a kind of move back because of this FCNR deposits and all coming up. But structurally, I don't think you will see the rupee strengthening over the years. The 10% CAGR or 10.5 rather is a dollar CAGR. It is not a rupee CAGR. So the rupee CAGR is much higher. Kavita, do you have the number? So GFF is a fund structure. And as I said, it is therefore more tax advantageous than GMAP.
So ma'am, the rupee CAGR is 14%.
Yeah. And with lower volatility than you have seen with India. So as I said, return is only part of the story. It has to be also, so 14% over whatever 11 years about, which is of course higher than what you've seen in India, but more important, it reduces the volatility. I've already answered that there's markets where we can invest in stocks and markets where we go through ETFs. Your team never responds. I totally refuse to believe it because we are very, very quick. We are normally, I mean, as soon as you send a message, just check your spam. If you don't get a response from us, check the spam because it's almost never the case that we have not responded. And FG small case uses the same system essentially as the PMS. So it is always on similar lines. Yes, I mean, it's anytime, as I said, the global investment for us is not like that India has not done well and therefore you should go global. It should be part of an asset allocation decision. And the general rule is don't tinker around with your asset allocation decision every day. And definitely don't look at it as from a backward looking thing that, oh, this has done well, so let me jump there. Gold has done well in 2025, so January, let me pile into gold. No, now India has not done well, therefore now let me pile into global. That is not the way to do it. I mean, I had exactly a reverse thing 3 years back when people said, oh, why did you ask us to go global? Last year, the returns in India were better. So, that's always going to happen, that some asset class will do better. What percentage in India and global? For any specific thing of that, these are my circumstances, this is the money, this is the portfolio, please get in touch with the team. We'll do that. Of course, the only thing is that if you're asking for some views on the portfolio, that takes time, but we always acknowledge and we always get back to you. I mean, there's absolutely no case where we don't reply. So, but sometimes as I said, things go to spam. So that's usually the problem. If you say we haven't replied, check the spam. So semiconductors, I've already said that I can't, this is not a sector we are heavily invested in or very comfortable with. I've already answered that this is the least 1% show you will find in the fund management industry. The NRI based in the UAE, you're already not paying tax, so you will be indifferent between being in a portfolio product or the fund product. Actually, no, yeah. Only thing is that in the portfolio product, then you're exposed to US estate taxes. That's one thing which is. How do I get in touch? I mean, I'm scrolling through the questions. Can someone confirm that the
It is there.
contact details are on the screen?
It is there on the screen, ma'am.
So somebody was saying that I heard a similar webinar of yours 2 years ago and I got in touch with, but I never actually invested and now I'm regretting it. So GMAP, GPEP, all of them, every buy and sell, if you are an India resident, will have a taxation. I mean, wherever you are resident, whatever is the rule there will apply. So if you are the estate duty tax of more than 60,000, then you come through the fund because the fund doesn't have this estate duty tax issue. So I think I've mostly seen all the questions, except that, as I said, the ones which are about particular circumstances of particular people, please send us a mail with your question and we will reply. I mean, right now, I mean, of course, today a lot of mails might come, so it might take a little bit of time, but we'll get back to you. So thank you very much for taking the time, and pleasure speaking with all of you, and hope to hear from you. Thanks, Kavita. Thanks, Karthik, Abhilash, and the others. Thank you.